Step away from the vehicle, now." The command sliced through the late afternoon air, sharp as a gavel strike, startling a small group of weekend shoppers drifting past the row of gleaming cars parked along the main thoroughfare of Maplewood Commons. The sound was crisp, authoritative, and laced with an assumption so old it had worn grooves in the American conscience. Marion Cole froze in place beside her father's 1967 Mustang, her hand still resting on the curve of the driver's door. She felt the warmth of the sun through the navy blazer she had thrown over her casual blouse. In the periphery, a pair of teenagers paused mid-conversation, their soda straws suspended halfway to their lips. Somewhere behind her, a father's voice urged his young son to keep walking. She did not move. Her father's voice, stored deep in her memory, rose unbidden. "People will try to take from you what they cannot imagine you earned. Never let them define your worth." That advice had been a constant through childhood, through law school, through the long climb to the bench. And now, standing in a parking lot full of strangers, it landed with the same weight it had decades ago. This was supposed to have been a quick stop. An errand between the quiet sanctuary of her home and an urgent judicial session she was expected to attend downtown. In her mind, she could still see the red-lit clock on her kitchen wall before she left. She had calculated just enough time to grab a small gift for a colleague's retirement party, but time was already slipping away, and every second that passed in this moment had a different kind of cost. Maplewood Commons on a Saturday was a polished slice of suburbia. Designer storefronts framed by well-kept planters, a light breeze carrying the scent of roasted coffee, and freshly baked pretzels from the food court. A street musician at the far end of the walkway strummed an old blues guitar, his rendition of "A Change Is Gonna Come," weaving through the clink of shopping bags and the hum of conversation. The man who had called out to her, Officer Grant Ellison, was already walking toward her with deliberate steps. His right hand hovered too close to the grip of his holstered weapon for comfort, his jaw tight beneath a neatly trimmed mustache. He wore the expression of someone certain he was about to correct a wrong. "This your car?" His voice was firm, his eyes scanning her face, her clothes, the car. "It is," she said evenly, keeping her hands visible. Ellison's gaze flicked from the gleaming chrome bumper to the leather portfolio on the passenger seat, its brass clasp catching the sunlight. "Mind telling me how you came to be driving a vehicle like this?" The question was less inquiry than accusation. Marion heard the murmurs from passers-by, felt their curiosity sharpen. She could sense the shift when a private exchange became a public spectacle. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a young woman about 20 feet away, her phone raised discreetly at first, then more openly. The young woman adjusted her angle, clearly recording. "I'll need to see your license, registration, and proof of purchase," Ellison continued. "I have all of that," Marion replied. "Then hand it over, now." "I will, but my license is in my bag, and my registration is inside the portfolio in the front seat." Ellison stepped closer, his shadow falling across the hood. "Keep your hands where I can see them. We'll get to your paperwork in a moment." The circle of onlookers widened. Phones appeared in more hands. Some faces were neutral, others skeptical, a few visibly sympathetic. An older woman pushed her way through the crowd with surprising determination for her age. Marion recognized her before she spoke, Clara Whitfield, a retired courthouse clerk who had worked the records desk for over 30 years. They had shared brief, polite exchanges in hallways, but the woman's eyes now held a different urgency. "Officer," Clara said, slightly breathless, "I know this woman. You're making a mistake." Ellison didn't turn toward her. "Ma'am, please step back. This is police business." I said step back," he snapped, his eyes still locked on Marion. The young woman filming shifted her position, bringing Clara into the frame. A name floated in Marion's mind, dredged from some courthouse charity event program. Lena Brooks, journalism student, if she remembered correctly. Lena's brows were furrowed, her lips moving silently as she narrated into the phone. Marion felt the first buzz of her phone against her hip. She knew without looking who it was. Chief Justice calling. The session. The vote. The measures on police accountability she was supposed to weigh in on. Ellison began walking a slow circle around the Mustang, his gaze moving over the glossy paintwork, the clean lines, the old California plates that read RC 1977, her father's initials, and the year of the car's make. "This vehicle's worth more than most people in this town make in 5 years," he said loudly enough for the growing crowd to hear. "So let's start with the truth. The truth is you're stalling," he interrupted, a faint smirk at the corner of his mouth. The hum of the blues guitar carried faintly from across the plaza, mixing with the sound of camera shutters and murmured speculation. Somewhere in the crowd, someone said, "That's profiling," and another voice answered, "Just let him do his job." Marion's mind was working in 2 directions at once: the legal implications of the encounter and the optics of every gesture she made. She knew what Ellison was building toward. She had seen the reports of similar incidents in her own courtroom. She also knew the danger of sudden movement. "Officer Ellison," she said, enunciating his name carefully as she read it off his badge. "Badge number—" "That's enough," he cut in. "Hands on the hood." Her palms touched the metal, still warm from the sun. The Mustang had been her father's pride, every curve and gleam a reflection of the hours he spent restoring it after long days at the courthouse. Standing there now, with strangers circling like jurors, she felt the weight of both legacies, his and hers. The second buzz of her phone came, longer this time. Chief Justice again? She imagined the conference table, the papers spread out, the murmured debate, the missing 9th vote. Ellison stepped to the passenger side, peering in at the portfolio. "What's in there?" "Legal documents," she said. "Confidential ones." "We'll see about that." "Not without a warrant," she replied evenly. His eyes narrowed. "You have something to hide." Her mouth curved, not in a smile, but in something sharper. "I have something to protect." The crowd pressed a little closer. The scent of cinnamon from the bakery mixed with the tang of heated asphalt. Lena's phone shifted again, catching the tension in Ellison's shoulders, the calm in Marion's face. The blues guitar paused. The absence of its melody made the air feel heavier. "You can make this easy," Ellison said. "It's already easy," she answered softly. "All you have to do is follow the law." A ripple passed through the bystanders, that subtle electric charge when words land harder than expected. Ellison's jaw worked, but he didn't speak immediately. Clara tried again. "Officer, I'm telling you—" "Step back," he barked, louder than before. Lena's voice carried over the crowd for the first time. "I'm live to more than 8,000 people right now. They can see everything." Ellison's eyes flicked toward her, then back to Marion. "This is your last chance to cooperate without making this worse." Marion heard the word worse and understood its layers. Worse for her safety, worse for his career, worse for the community watching this unfold. She took a slow breath. The blues guitar resumed somewhere in the distance, picking up the next verse. Her phone buzzed again, persistent. She didn't move to answer. Somewhere to her left, a child asked, "Daddy, what's happening?" The father's reply was too low to catch, but Marion saw the way the man's hand tightened around his son's shoulder. Ellison's stance shifted. I'm going to ask you again, how did you come to be in possession of this vehicle? Marion met his gaze steadily. It belonged to my father. Name? Robert Cole. Never heard of him. You should have. The third buzz of her phone came, and she ignored it again, her eyes still locked on his. The street musician's voice floated on the air. It's been a long time coming. Ellison took a step closer. Let's take a walk to my car. We'll sort this out downtown. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. Never let them define your worth. Marion felt the circle tighten, the weight of every phone camera, every whisper, every assumption, and she knew in this moment that whatever happened next would not just be about her and this car. Her phone buzzed yet again, and she still did not move as Ellison's gaze hardened, and the crowd seemed to lean forward as one, waiting for the next move. By the time the backup units arrived, the crowd was 3 rows deep, and Lena Brooks's viewer count had passed 8,000. The sound of idling engines added a low, mechanical hum to the already tense air, flashing lights painting the faces of shoppers who had stopped to watch. Conversations hushed when 2 more patrol cars rolled slowly into Maplewood Commons, their tires crunching over the uneven seams in the blacktop. Marion Cole kept her gaze fixed on the polished chrome hood of the Mustang, her palms resting lightly against it, every movement deliberate. She knew the danger in appearing impatient. Her father's old lessons came back with surprising clarity, especially one from her early years as a young attorney. The court of public opinion can move faster than any bench. Sometimes, it can deliver the verdict before the trial even begins. She understood the weight of each camera lens pointed her way, how quickly these images could spread, and what narrative they might fuel if she made the wrong move. The situation had shifted since Officer Ellison's initial approach. It was no longer a quiet confrontation between a uniform and a civilian. It had become a public theater, the kind that could make or break reputations in an afternoon. She could feel the stakes rising with each curious face pressing into the outer ring of the crowd, with each whispered exchange about whether this was profiling or just standard police work. Maplewood Commons looked different now. Where there had been the lazy warmth of a weekend shopping trip, there was now a charged expectancy. The air smelled of exhaust and cinnamon, a strange combination from the mall's parking lot and nearby bakery. A group of teenagers stood on the steps outside the coffee shop, their iced drinks forgotten in hand, eyes locked on the scene. The blues guitarist had stopped playing entirely. Grant Ellison seemed more aware of the cameras now, his voice louder, posture squared as if he were performing for an audience. He spoke into his radio with clipped precision, calling in possible vehicle theft, making sure the words carried. Marion could feel them land in the crowd, the way they created an impression long before any proof could be produced. Clara Whitfield tried again, raising her voice above the murmurs. "Officer, please listen to me. I've worked at the courthouse for decades. I know who she is." Ellison's head turned sharply. "Ma'am, I've already told you to step back." The edge in his tone was unmistakable. Clara hesitated but didn't retreat entirely, her eyes darting to Marion in a silent exchange of solidarity. Lena Brooks had moved closer, steadying her phone with both hands now. The tiny red light on her screen confirmed she was still live. Her commentary was low but steady, feeding her growing audience with descriptions of the scene, careful to note each time Marion attempted to speak and was cut off. Marion's phone vibrated again against her hip, and she imagined the Chief Justice at the other end of the line, checking the clock, wondering why one of the state's most reliable judges had not appeared for a vote. The urgency of that meeting pressed at her ribs, but she would not abandon the calm that was her only real weapon right now. Ellison motioned toward her with an open hand. "Let's make this easy, Judge." He caught himself, realizing what he'd almost said, and corrected. "Let's make this easy, ma'am. Produce your identification, or I'll have to escalate this further." She met his gaze evenly. "You may have my identification, but you may not rifle through confidential legal documents without cause or a warrant." Riley Carter, the younger officer who had arrived with the second unit, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was doing crowd control, but his eyes kept returning to Marion, as though trying to fit the pieces together. His voice was measured when he spoke to Ellison. "Sarge, the crowd's getting restless. Might be worth stepping back a minute." Ellison waved him off. "We're fine. I've got it under control." Victor Alvarez, the mall's security supervisor, hovered at the edge of the circle. His earpiece crackled with updates from his team, but his attention was fixed on Ellison. Marion could read it in his face. He knew this was beyond the scope of routine parking lot security, and that the mall's name might soon be plastered across the evening news. A man in a blue polo shirt whispered to his wife, and Marion caught the words, "Why doesn't he just let her get her ID?" The wife glanced around nervously, as if worried the comment might be overheard by the wrong person. Ellison straightened, making his next words loud enough to carry over the murmurs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for failure to provide proper identification and obstruction." The words rang in the air like a dropped gavel. A few gasps came from the crowd. Marion caught Lena's sharp intake of breath behind her phone's microphone. She stayed still, her voice low and steady. "On what grounds do you allege obstruction? You've refused to cooperate." "I have refused to allow you to violate the Fourth Amendment," she corrected softly, though she knew the subtle legal framing would be lost on most in the audience. Lena's voice rose just enough for those around her to hear. "Wait, I think I know who she is." The crowd leaned in almost imperceptibly, a wave of curiosity and the first stirrings of doubt in Ellison's narrative. Marion said nothing more, letting the tension hang there, her composure intact, while every lens in the circle remained fixed on her, waiting to see what would come next. "Officer Ellison, I'm going to reach for my identification now. You can watch my hands." Marion Cole's voice cut through the din of the gathered crowd with the same unshakable calm she brought to her courtroom. It was not a request, not a plea, but a statement of intent, measured and deliberate. Somewhere behind the wall of phones and curious faces, a man muttered, "She's got guts." The comment seemed to ripple outward, breaking through the low hum of speculation that had been building since the first squad car rolled in. Lena Brooks felt a shiver run down her spine as she steadied her phone, the live counter on her stream now well past 50,000. She remembered a quote from a community speaker she had filmed last year. "The truth doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it simply steps into the light." Watching Marion now, Lena realized she was witnessing that very moment. Marion's goal here was as clear to herself as the sound of her own breathing. Shift the power dynamic without ever raising her voice. The setting was still the parking lot of Maplewood Commons, but it had transformed into something else entirely, a stage where the stakes were measured not in fines or arrests, but in reputations, public trust, and the unspoken weight of history. The air was heavy with late-day heat. The scent of cinnamon from the bakery fighting against the metallic tang from idling patrol cars. The Mustang's polished body reflected flashes of blue and red, its chrome gleaming like a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Ellison's posture stiffened as Marion's words landed. "Ma'am, I'm telling you." "Watch my hands," she repeated, her eyes locking on his with a steadiness that made even some of the bystanders shift uncomfortably. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her right hand from the hood to the strap of her bag. The gesture was so controlled it almost looked like choreography. Clara Whitfield stood just behind the front line of onlookers, her face alight with something between relief and vindication. She knew, with the certainty of decades in the courthouse, what was about to happen. Marian unfastened the clasp of her bag, pulled out the leather portfolio, and opened it to reveal a thick cream-colored card embossed with the state seal. She held it up so that the nearest cameras and Ellison could see it clearly. The murmurs began almost immediately, swelling into audible exclamations. That's a judge's ID," someone whispered, and the phrase was picked up, repeated, until it seemed to circle the crowd. Ellison's jaw worked as he stared at the card, his expression flickering between disbelief and something that looked dangerously close to panic. Still, he tried to hold his ground. "Protocol still," Marian's voice, still calm, carried easily over the crowd. "The emergency judicial conference I am missing at this very moment is convened to vote on police accountability measures. Measures, Officer Ellison, that directly impact cases like this." Lena's phone feed exploded with comments, the chat box a blur of outrage, applause emojis, and demands for Ellison's suspension. The viewer count surged again, crossing 60,000. From the edge of the police perimeter, Riley Carter exchanged a glance with another officer, his eyebrows raised in recognition of just how far this situation had spiraled. Clara took a small step forward. "This woman is Judge Marian Cole," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I've worked in that courthouse most of my life. Her father, Judge Robert Cole, drove this very car for years." More cameras turned toward Clara, catching the sharp glint of her eyes as she stared down the officer who had ignored her earlier warnings. Ellison's radio crackled, dispatch relaying information about the ongoing judicial session downtown. His color drained slightly, but he squared his shoulders and tried to speak again. "Ma'am, regardless of your zatum." "You mean regardless of my position?" Marian cut in, her words precise. "Regardless of my oath to uphold the Constitution you swore to serve? Regardless of the fact that your conduct here today mirrors the very behaviors under review in that meeting?" The weight of her words settled over the gathering. Even the children who had been fidgeting moments before now stood still, sensing the gravity of what was happening. She stepped closer, not enough to breach the distance, but enough to make her presence unavoidable. Her eyes never left Ellison's. "You should also know that the agenda of that meeting includes a federal civil rights case pending against you." Gasps erupted, and Lena's camera swung toward Ellison, whose expression was a mix of shock and fury. The realization hit the crowd almost instantly. The officer detaining this woman was standing in the shadow of his own misconduct record. For a heartbeat, silence ruled. The only sound was the faint click of a news photographer's shutter. Then the murmur began again. Louder this time, voices tinged with outrage and disbelief. Ellison's lips parted, but no words came. Marian held his gaze, her portfolio still open, the official seal catching the fading sunlight. "And now, Officer Ellison," she said, her voice low but carrying. "The world is watching. You have 3 options, Officer Ellison, and 60 seconds to decide." Marian Cole's voice carried across the parking lot, steady and resonant, as if it were a formal proceeding rather than a confrontation under the fading light. The crowd hushed instantly. Even the distant hum of the street outside seemed to quiet, as if the very air leaned in to hear. She remembered something a senior judge once told her during her first year on the bench. Sometimes justice is about forcing the clock to tick in the right direction. That wisdom pulsed through her now, shaping her approach. This was no longer about one car or one incident. This was about creating a moment Ellison couldn't sidestep, a moment that would leave an imprint on everyone present. The sun had dipped low enough that the glow from the storefront windows lit the parking lot in pockets of gold and shadow. Media vans idled at the curb, their dish antennas pointed skyward. The buzz of live broadcasting equipment and the rhythmic blink of camera record lights gave the scene the strange texture of both a crime scene and a press conference. Marion stood with her shoulders squared, the leather portfolio still in her left hand. Her tone was not raised, but the clarity of her diction made every word land like a hammer on glass. Option 1. Immediate suspension pending a federal investigation under Title 42, Section 1983. Potential criminal charges. Permanent termination possible. Option 2. Voluntary demotion. 200 hours of bias training and testimony before the state legislature on the dangers of racial profiling. Option 3. Immediate retirement with full benefits. No future in law enforcement or security work. Ellison's face was a study in conflict pride and self-preservation warring behind his eyes. He glanced toward the patrol cars, toward the younger officer Riley Carter, as if searching for an anchor. Riley avoided his gaze, his body language cautious but not hostile. From the crowd's edge, Clara Whitfield watched intently, her arms folded across her chest. She stood close enough to catch every word, her satisfaction muted but unmistakable. Beside her, Victor Alvarez's radio murmured with updates from mall security. He barely listened, his attention fixed on the unfolding reckoning. Chief Lawson Whitfield stepped forward, arriving with the kind of deliberate calm that came from decades of managing tense situations. He scanned the scene quickly, the media lenses, the restless crowd, his mother standing like a sentinel, and Marion holding court in the middle of a suburban parking lot. "Judge Cole," he said in greeting, nodding with the formality of a courtroom. "I understand you have terms." "They're on record now," she replied, turning just enough for the nearest microphones to catch her words. "Officer Ellison has less than a minute to decide." Lena Brooks, standing in the second row of the crowd, tightened her grip on her phone. Her live feed was nearing 90,000 viewers, comments flying so quickly she couldn't read them. The counter ticked upward like a metronome counting down the seconds left in Ellison's career. Ellison's breathing had gone shallow. He looked from Marion to the watching media, to the faces in the crowd, and then to Chief Whitfield. The chief's expression was neutral, but his silence carried weight. "You can't expect me to," Ellison began. "I expect you to choose," Marion interrupted, "because in 40 seconds, I'll choose for you, and that choice will be option 1. The murmurs from the crowd swelled. Cameras zoomed in. Ellison's jaw flexed, the muscle working like a man chewing on the taste of his own pride. He glanced once more at Riley, who now met his eyes without flinching. Riley's subtle shake of the head was all the confirmation he needed. There was no saving face here, only the question of how much dignity he could salvage. "I'll take option 2, Ellison said finally, the words clipped, almost swallowed. "Demotion, training, testimony." A ripple passed through the crowd, surprise, some approval, and a few incredulous scoffs. The choice was unusual, especially from an officer of his tenure. "Then your journey toward accountability begins now," Marion said, her tone final. Chief Whitfield stepped closer to Ellison, extending a hand. Badge, firearm, and radio. The moment was ceremonial in its precision, the symbols of authority passing from hand to hand under the glow of the camera lights. Ellison hesitated only a fraction of a second before unclipping his badge, unholstering his service weapon, and placing them in the chief's palm. Gasps and murmurs fluttered through the audience. For a moment, all eyes were on the exchange, but Marion knew the real work was only beginning. The badge and gun were tangible, but what needed to change was far less visible and far more difficult to surrender. As the chief stepped back, Marion's eyes didn't leave Ellison's. "This is not leniency. It is an opportunity to understand the harm you've caused and to prevent it from happening again. I expect measurable outcomes." Ellison didn't answer, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the crowd, as if imagining a world without the uniform he had worn for decades. From somewhere in the mass of onlookers, a voice called, "What happens next?" Marion turned slightly toward the cameras. "Next, we talk about the changes that must be made so that scenes like this become impossible." Her gaze shifted back to Ellison. "And Officer Ellison will help deliver that message himself." This isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that taught him this was acceptable. Marion Cole's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of steel in it now, the kind of weight that made people stop shuffling their feet and look up. Her words didn't hang in the air so much as press into it, claiming space in the way only hard-earned authority could. Lena Brooks felt a rush of recognition, recalling her father's quiet recollections about marching in the late 1960s. "We didn't just march for the moment. We marched so they'd change the rules." Those stories, often told over the kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, now seemed to echo in Marion's tone. The press of people in the Maplewood Commons parking lot had shifted. The shouts and murmurs of the earlier confrontation had softened into attentive silence. News vans lined the curb, their floodlights cutting through the warm dusk. Camera crews moved with a kind of reverent urgency, repositioning for every sentence Marion spoke. Marion stood at the center of the semicircle formed by the crowd, her posture formal but her expression human, approachable. Ellison was no longer beside her. He stood several feet back, unarmed, stripped of his badge, a uniformed officer without the symbols of his authority. Chief Lawson Whitfield had taken up a position nearby, arms loosely crossed, listening with the gravity of someone who knew the eyes of the state were on him. Clara Whitfield stood with him, hands clasped over her bag, her face reflecting both satisfaction and concern. "Accountability cannot be a headline," Marion continued, letting the cameras take in each deliberate word. "It must be a structure. It must be written into the way we train, the way we supervise, and the way we listen to the people we serve." She opened the portfolio again, this time not to reveal her identification, but to remove several stapled pages. The paper flapped lightly in the evening air as she held it up for the cameras. "This is a proposal for reform, prepared before I even stepped into this parking lot. Body cameras for all officers on traffic stops, with footage reviewed by civilian oversight boards, quarterly bias training taught by independent civil rights educators, monthly public reports on stop demographics, and a civilian oversight board with subpoena power not just to observe, but to act." Chief Whitfield stepped forward, his voice carrying easily. "On behalf of the Maplewood Police Department, we commit to implementing these reforms in full, starting immediately." A ripple went through the crowd. Some clapped, others simply nodded, as if recognizing that words like these had been spoken before, but rarely followed through. Marion knew that cynicism was earned, and that was why she kept going. "This department will not work alone," she said. "Maplewood Commons security staff will adopt these same bias prevention measures." Victor Alvarez, still near the edge of the crowd, spoke into his earpiece before lifting his chin toward Marion. "Mall management has authorized me to confirm that we will match those measures within 60 days. Lena caught the way Marion's gaze softened just slightly, at that a flicker of appreciation for a rare moment when corporate policy bent toward the public good without the push of a lawsuit. Reporters began firing questions, their microphones extended over the heads of the crowd. One asked about the cost. Another asked whether this incident would become a legal case. Marion addressed each with the same calm precision, framing the reforms as investments in trust and reminding them that the cost of inaction was measured in both dollars and dignity. In the periphery, Ellison stood still, his head slightly bowed, the tension in his jaw the only sign of the conflict inside him. Marion glanced his way briefly. And Officer Ellison will speak about what he learned here today, not as a symbol of failure, but as a warning and a catalyst for change. The applause that followed wasn't raucous. It was sustained and deliberate, the sound of people recognizing a rare combination of accountability and possibility. As the noise faded, Marion looked toward the Mustang, parked where it had been all afternoon, its chrome catching the first hint of night's coolness. The sight of it sparked a small, private smile. "This car's not done teaching lessons yet," she murmured, just loud enough for the cameras to catch, before turning toward the next reporter stepping forward with a question. In the state capitol hearing room, Officer Grant Ellison cleared his throat before a packed audience, the sound faint but sharp in the stillness. The vaulted ceiling carried every small noise, so even the shuffle of papers or the creak of a chair felt amplified. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, slanting across the polished oak desks where state legislators sat in attentive rows. From her seat in the gallery, Marion Cole watched him closely, the same way she had observed witnesses in her courtroom for years. She thought of her father's words from long ago. The measure of a person isn't if they've been wrong, it's what they do after they've been shown. She had repeated those words to herself the day she gave Ellison his 3 options in the parking lot. Now she would see whether he had truly understood them. 6 months had passed since that Saturday at Maplewood Commons. The Mustang was parked outside her home this morning, its chrome gleaming as she turned the key. The reforms she had demanded were no longer just promises, they had begun to take root. But here, in the hearing room of the California State Capitol, the final piece of the ripple effect was about to unfold. Chief Lawson Whitfield sat at the front beside other law enforcement leaders, his uniform immaculate, his posture formal. Clara Whitfield occupied the front row, wearing a tailored suit in a deep blue that spoke of quiet dignity. Her hands rested on the bag she had carried for decades to the courthouse. A few seats over, Lena Brooks, now with press credentials pinned to her lapel, balanced a notepad and recorder, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced alertness of a young reporter chasing a major story. Ellison stood at the witness table, a glass of water before him. His face looked older, the edges of his confidence worn down. When he began to speak, his voice was steady but stripped of the defensive sharpness that had marked their first encounter. "I saw what I wanted to see," he said into the microphone, "not what was in front of me. And that's what almost cost me my career and our community its trust." The room was silent except for the scratch of pens on paper. Ellison continued, recounting the training he had undergone, the sessions where he had been confronted with scenarios he could no longer explain away. He spoke about the discomfort of being studied by recruits as a cautionary tale, about the sting of seeing his own body camera footage played back in a classroom. Marion listened without moving, measuring the words not for polish, but for sincerity. She noted the way his eyes met those of the legislators directly, and the absence of rehearsed pauses. He was not trying to save himself anymore. He was trying to make himself useful. One legislator, an older man with a silver bolo tie, leaned forward. "Officer Ellison, are you recommending this kind of training become mandatory statewide?" "Yes, sir," Ellison replied, without hesitation, "because without it, I wouldn't be standing here asking you to make it law." The vote on the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act passed unanimously an hour later. Applause rose from the gallery, not the kind of wild cheering reserved for rallies, but the firm, sustained approval of people who understood the long road ahead. Later, in the Capitol Rotunda, Marion spoke briefly with Lena for a follow-up piece. They stood beneath a mural of California's history, the painted faces of farm workers and activists looking down from high above. Marion told her about the Robert Cole Foundation for Judicial Excellence, recently launched to mentor young attorneys and support legal reforms, Across the marble floor, Clara was speaking to Chief Whitfield, her voice low but warm, her hand resting on his forearm as they watched the legislators file out. By mid-afternoon, Marion was back in her Mustang, heading towards the courthouse. The sky was a pale spring blue, and the air carried the faint scent of orange blossoms from the trees that lined the boulevard. She parked in her usual spot, just outside the front steps, the polished hood reflecting the flutter of the state flag overhead. She locked the car and stood for a moment, looking up at the courthouse columns, feeling the familiar weight and promise of the work waiting inside. The fight for justice, she knew, was never finished. And as long as she could walk through those doors, neither was she. From the moment Marion Cole stepped out of her father's Mustang in the Maplewood Commons parking lot, the quiet dignity that defined her life was tested. The afternoon had been warm and ordinary, a slice of suburban ease broken by the sharp voice of Officer Grant Ellison, whose suspicion came not from evidence, but from the deep grooves of prejudice worn into habit over years. That first exchange carried the sting of history, moments older viewers would recognize instantly. Moments where the color of a person's skin was weighed more heavily than their words. Injustice began not with shouting, but with the steady erosion of respect, as Ellison's questions implied ownership was impossible, as his body language suggested authority that didn't need to be justified. Around them, the crowd began to form some curious, some concerned, some ready to film, but not to intervene. The presence of Clara Whitfield in those early moments mattered deeply. An elder who knew truth when she saw it, she became the first thread of allyship woven into this unfolding tapestry. The tension grew with every unanswered phone call from the Chief Justice, with every minute that passed as Marion remained pressed to the hood of her father's car. That car was more than steel and paint. It was a family legacy, a moving memorial to a man who had given his life to the law. Ellison didn't see that. What he saw was a combination of race and wealth that his experience told him could only mean theft. By the time the backup units arrived, the parking lot had transformed into a stage. Smartphones became witness stands, social media a courtroom, the crowd a jury. Lena Brooks, with her steady camera and growing audience, became the bridge between the parking lot and the wider world. Every second of Marion's calm, deliberate composure reached thousands beyond that asphalt, carrying with it the truth of what was happening. When Marion finally revealed her identity, it wasn't done with a flourish. It was done with the same precision she used in court, controlled, undeniable, irrefutable. The seal of the judiciary caught the light, and with it came a shift in the air. The crowd's murmurs changed from speculation to recognition. Ellison's posture faltered for the first time, but pride and protocol tangled inside him, making him push forward even as the ground crumbled under his feet. Then came the deeper twist, the revelation that the meeting Marion was missing was to vote on a case involving Ellison himself. In that moment, the full irony crystallized. The man detaining her was standing in the shadow of his own misconduct. That truth, revealed in front of cameras, stripped the situation bare. Chief Lawson Whitfield's arrival marked a pivot. Authority shifted, and Marion was no longer the questioned, she was the one issuing terms. Her three options for Ellison weren't born of spite. They were rooted in the same belief she had always carried, that justice was not about vengeance, but about restoration and truth. Ellison's choice to accept demotion, training, and public testimony was his first real act of accountability, perhaps in years. The reforms Marion laid out were not abstract ideals. They were specific, measurable, and tied to both police and private security conduct. Body cameras, civilian oversight, public reporting, bias training. These were not words for the sake of optics. They were tools designed to prevent future humiliation, to close the space where prejudice could hide. The applause that followed was not for a win, but for the possibility of lasting change. Clara stood as proof that wisdom and persistence could still pierce through stubbornness. Lena's footage proved that the younger generation had its own form of courage, one that leveraged technology to hold power to account. Months later, when Ellison stood before the state legislature, his voice was quieter, but his words carried weight. He admitted to seeing what he wanted to see, to letting bias guide his judgment. That confession mattered not just for him, but for every recruit, every department, every policymaker who heard it. The Police Accountability and Community Trust Act that followed was a direct descendant of that Saturday afternoon. Marion's own legacy expanded with the founding of the Robert Cole Foundation for Judicial Excellence. She understood that the work of reform was never finished, that mentorship and education were as vital as any courtroom ruling. Her allies had grown, Clara now chairing an oversight board, Lena reporting on civil rights, and Chief Whitfield implementing the reforms without delay. What began as an insult in a parking lot became a catalyst for statewide change. The lesson was never about one bad officer. It was about a culture that tolerated bias until someone stood in its path. Marion's refusal to meet hostility with anger, her ability to turn humiliation into reform, was the heart of the story. The difference between superficial policy and genuine human respect is the difference between a department that checks boxes and one that changes hearts. The courage it takes to confront not just a person, but an entire system, is immense. That courage often looks like patience, calm words, and unshakable posture in the face of disrespect. For older Americans who have lived through turning points in civil rights history, Marion's journey is both familiar and affirming. It reminds us that allies still matter, that public witnesses can change outcomes, and that systemic change often begins in ordinary places, in parking lots, on sidewalks, in boardrooms where dignity is defended in real time. The Mustang still sits in her driveway, its chrome and paint cared for with the same devotion her father gave it. Every Saturday, she drives it to the courthouse, a quiet act of remembrance and defiance. It is a rolling reminder that what happened once will not be forgotten, and that the work continues. Marion's story tells us that reform is possible, but only when truth is exposed, when accountability is embraced, and when dignity is protected above pride. She showed that justice is not the loudest voice in the room, but the one that cannot be shaken from what is right. And so, the philosophy remains. Justice achieved through education is justice that endures. If you felt the weight of this story, if you believe in the fight for dignity and real change, leave the number 1 in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to hear the next story, because each voice, each story, brings us closer to a world where respect is not conditional, where assumptions are tested by truth, and where the measure of a person is seen not in the color of their skin, but in the content of their character.